Of all the mysterious places on Earth, none quite captures the imagination like Antarctica. This vast frozen continent has become a breeding ground for some of the most compelling conspiracies you'll ever encounter. And today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating yet controversial stories of them all. The alleged secret operations of the British military in Antarctica right after World War II. What makes this even more intriguing? These missions supposedly took place years before Admiral Richard Byrd's famous Operation Highjump.
Thumbs up to this gentleman. The Secretary has approved our plans, confirming you, Admiral Byrd, as the officer in charge of the expedition, and you, Admiral Cruzen, as the task force commander. And we get everything we need. That makes Operation Highjump the greatest polar expedition in history.
But this isn't just a story about military operations. It spirals into something far more extraordinary. Claims that Hitler's Third Reich had already beaten everyone to the punch. We're talking about fully operational military bases hidden deep within the ice, advanced technology that defied the era, and, if you can believe it, genetic experiments being conducted in total secrecy at the bottom of the world. Hi folks, I'm Johnny, and welcome to The Oddest. The most incredible claims first surfaced through James Roberts' groundbreaking articles in Nexus magazine, which was published between late 2005 and early 2006. Now, Roberts himself admits we should take these stories with a grain of salt, but I have to tell you, once you hear what he uncovered, you might find yourself wondering just how much truth lies beneath the ice. Long before World War II reached its devastating climax, the Third Reich had already established a mysterious foothold in Antarctica. They claimed a region known as Queen Maud Land, then they went and boldly renamed it New Schwabenland. Now, what we know about this comes from an incredible source, a guy called James Roberts. He learned these details from a British soldier involved in a classified mission to infiltrate this base. And trust me, as we'll discover later on, the British had some compelling reasons to launch such a daring operation. The soldier's story is fascinating. When Europe finally saw peace in 1945, he was laying low in a Yugoslav cave, probably thinking to himself that the war is over. While relieved to avoid any sort of deployment to the Pacific theatre, he instead found himself posted to Palestine, where tensions were reaching a boiling point. But here's where things really get strange, or start to get strange. See, in October of 1945, he received mysterious orders that caught him completely off guard. The mission was so classified that even his superior officers were in the dark about why he had been chosen for this. First stop, Gibraltar. Then, under absolute secrecy, he was sent to the Falkland Islands. But he wasn't alone. Other elite British forces were gathering there also. Perhaps the most strange detail? During their flight to the Falklands, everyone on board was strictly ordered to maintain complete silence. When they finally reached the forbidden destination, well, that's when things started getting even more mysterious. When they eventually landed, they were met by two key figures. A British officer who'd be leading this mysterious operation, and a Norwegian resistance fighter who'd become their lifeline eventually, training them to survive in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. What followed was a month of brutal preparation. I mean, imagine this. These soldiers were literally dunked into the freezing South Atlantic waters, pushing their bodies and minds to the absolute limit. But that was just the beginning. After this punishing training, they finally learned the truth about their mission. And I don't have to tell you, it wasn't good news. The briefing came with a chilling admission. Many of them might never make it back alive. Their mission centred around the British base in Modheim, but their real target lay in the Mulig-Hoffman Mountains, where they were to investigate what was only described as anomalous activity. This wasn't just any operation. They were told that they were now part of Britain's secret war, And that's when the real bombshells started dropping. See, it turned out that the British hadn't just been sitting idle there while the Nazis explored Antarctica. See, following the Third Reich's expeditions there in 1938 and in 1939, British forces had quietly established several bases across that continent. Modheim wasn't just another outpost, it was their crown jewel, their largest and most crucial base. But why? Well, see, it sat less than 200 miles from what they believed was the Nazis' main installation. Now, here's where the puzzle pieces start falling into place. The British had been tracking intense German activity in the South Ocean, right off Antarctica's coast. What was even more suspicious than that? Well, multiple Nazi U-boats had mysteriously vanished after the war. The British had just managed to capture 3 of the Third Reich's most important figures: Rudolf Hess, Heinrich Himmler, and Hitler's chosen successor Karl Donitz. Away from American and Soviet ears, British interrogators had extracted information that would never make it into history books. Information that led directly to this secret mission. So, what exactly did these high-ranking Nazis reveal? Well, according to our anonymous witness, British intelligence had uncovered something extraordinary. The Third Reich hadn't just built one base in Antarctica as previously thought, they had established several. These weren't just military installations either, they were escape routes, hideouts for the Nazi elite. But trust me, that's not even the most shocking part of this story. The unit learned that they weren't the first team sent there to investigate this. The previous summer, a group of engineers and scientists had made a stunning discovery. It was an ancient tunnel buried into the ice. Of that entire first unit, only 2 members made it back alive. Trapped by the Antarctic winter, these survivors maintained radio contact with the base, but their transmissions, well, they were disturbing, to say the least. They spoke about finding an active Nazi base of Third Reich members who had survived there since the war, and most bizarrely, of mysterious things they called polar men. Their final transmission came in July of 1945. The unit sat in stunned silence as they listened to this recording. The last desperate words of a terrified man. The polar men have found us. And then, nothing but static. Then came the moment of truth, their mission briefing. The orders were clear. Reach Modheim, locate that mysterious tunnel, and find out exactly what was down there. They needed to verify these wild claims about Nazi survivors and these mysterious polar men. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a reconnaissance mission. Their ultimate objective? Well, it was to eliminate any remaining Third Reich threat hiding beneath the ice. The soldiers understandably had a multitude of questions, and surprisingly, they got straight answers. One burning question stood out. Why was Britain going in there alone? Why keep this from their wartime allies, the Americans or the Soviets? The answer revealed a fascinating glimpse into post-war politics. Britain, it seemed, was playing a dangerous game of keeping power balanced. They couldn't risk either the Americans or the Soviets getting their hands on any secret Nazi technology or expertise that might be hidden down there. Whatever secrets lay beneath the Antarctic ice, Britain wanted them either destroyed or safely held in British hands. So, with the stakes made crystal clear, the unit made their final preparations. Their insertion point was 20 miles from Modheim base. Elite soldiers parachuting into one of the most hostile environments on Earth, knowing that from the moment their boots touched that ice, they were at war. Snow tractors were their only welcome party in that vast white wilderness. They were operating under complete radio silence. No communication, no backup, and most sobering of all, no way out. As their source chillingly put it, retreat simply wasn't an option. What they found at the base wasn't exactly welcoming. At first glance it seemed deserted, nothing but empty halls and frozen silence. The unit then split up to cover more ground, but within moments everything changed. A tripwire snapped and suddenly sirens were screaming throughout the air. Then, cutting through the chaos, a voice demanded they identify themselves. Every soldier's weapon snapped up instantly until their commander ordered them to stand down. That voice? Well, it turned out it belonged to one of the survivors from the first mission. But what this survivor said next really sent a chill throughout the unit. The other surviving soldier was in Bunker 1, and he wasn't alone. One of those mysterious polar men was in there with him. The unit commander didn't hesitate one bit. He ordered his men to breach that bunker. The survivor practically begged him over the intercom not to open it, his desperate protests echoing throughout the base. But orders are orders, and one soldier was sent in. What happened next would haunt them forever. First came the silence, that awful anticipatory silence that makes your skin crawl. Then 2 gunshots shattered the silence. Before anyone could react, something emerged. The witnesses described it as a mountain of a figure, and it moved with impossible speed, vanishing into the darkness before one single bullet could find its mark. But the real horror awaited inside that bunker. Their fellow soldier lay there dead. His throat, well, let's just say it wasn't a clean death. They found a pile of human bones nearby also, which appeared to be all that remained of the surviving member of the first unit. The surviving soldier's story painted a picture more incredible than they could ever have imagined. The original unit had followed that ancient tunnel for miles, eventually emerging into something that defied explanation. See, it was a vast underground cavern that was unnaturally warm. But that wasn't the strangest part. Lakes dotted the massive space, and most telling of all, the entire cavern was artificially lit. If they'd had any doubts at all about a Nazi presence there before, well, those lights were a telltale sign. Following standard protocol, they'd split into smaller teams to explore. Entire bases carved right into the cavern walls, and there, in underground docks, sat at least one Nazi U-boat. But the real shock came when they stumbled upon hangars housing aircraft, unlike anything they had ever seen before. Just as they were trying to process all these discoveries at once, everything went sideways. Without warning, they found themselves surrounded by Third Reich soldiers. The enemy they'd thought they'd defeated months ago was very much alive and down there under the ice. In the chaos that followed, most of the unit was captured. Our survivor and his companion managed to slip away unnoticed, but not before witnessing something that would haunt them forever: the execution of their fellow soldiers. As they desperately made their way back through the tunnel, their nightmare wasn't over quite yet. Those mysterious beings, the polar men, they were in pursuit. So the 2 men eventually made it back up to the base, but they were in a tough spot. The brutal winter conditions made any kind of rescue mission pretty much impossible. And the trekking back to the main base on foot, well, that was out of the question. They both came to an agreement. Each of them would take a radio and split up, holing up in separate bunkers. Now here's where things get even more weird. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, one of the men apparently lured one of these so-called polar men into his bunker. I mean, maybe he was trying to take it down, who knows. But whatever the plan was, it backfired spectacularly, and the soldier didn't make it out alive. That just left one survivor, alone in his bunker. He waited, even after losing contact over the radio, until reinforcements finally arrived. Now here's another wild part. The surviving soldier claimed that these polar men were the result of some kind of bizarre Third Reich experiment. He went on to say that the Nazis had conducted several experiments, one of which supposedly led to mastering some kind of unknown power source. And these creatures, the polar men, had been genetically altered to survive the brutal Antarctic conditions. They weren't just survivors though. They were described as aggressive killing machine-like creatures, designed solely to systematically hunt their targets. I mean, this is definitely the plot of a Hollywood action movie, right? As you can imagine, with all this information, the unit wasn't exactly thrilled about poking around in the ancient tunnel network. But the very next day, orders came in loud and clear. Get down there, lads. So before long, the unit reached the dry valley region on their way to the tunnel entrance. Gone was the ice that you would expect to see in Antarctica. See, instead, they were surrounded by barren, desert-like landscape, almost like something out of the North African Sahara. When they finally located the tunnel entrance, the team set up a base camp and began a preliminary inspection. The scientists on the team quickly noted that the tunnel it didn't appear to be naturally formed. The walls had this smooth granite-like finish, almost as if it had been deliberately designed. If that was true, well, I mean, that pointed to something huge. Evidence of a long-lost civilization in Antarctica, one that could still be hidden from the world even today. The plan was fairly simple. The team would rest overnight and begin exploring the tunnel the next again day. But here's the weird thing about this. Since it was summer in Antarctica, there was no actual night time. It was just 24 hours of pure daylight. That night, however, things took a dramatic turn. One of the polar men appeared near the camp. This time, though, the unit was ready for them. They managed to lure the creature closer. They captured it and ultimately killed it. What they discovered was shocking. During a dissection of this creature, they confirmed that the polar man was, in fact, just human. But it was far stronger than an average person and had this unique ability to produce extra hair, almost like a built-in adaptation to survive the freezing conditions. The next morning, with the excitement from the night behind them, the team prepared to enter this tunnel. 2 soldiers were left behind to guard the entrance to the tunnel. The radio, their only lifeline to the base, which was about 20 miles away, and of course the corpse of this recently slain polar man. So the team heading into the tunnel wasn't taking any chances. There were 9 men in total, including the unit leader, a scientist, a Norwegian expert, and the lone survivor from the first unit. They were armed to the teeth with heavy weapons and, as one account put it, enough explosives to wage a small war. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the darkness became absolute. They marched in pitch blackness for around 4 hours. Just imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been. But then, off in the distance, they saw it. A faint light up ahead. They pressed on, and about an hour later, they emerged into a massive, artificially lit cavern. It was exactly as the survivor had described. The team explored the cavern discreetly, trying to stay out of sight as best they could, and eventually found themselves looking down on what can only be described as an underground hive of activity. They saw Third Reich personnel below, scurrying around like little ants, constructing massive structures into the cavern walls. While the leader began formulating a plan to destroy everything, the base, the personnel, just all of it, the scientist furiously scribbled down notes about what they were seeing. They stayed hidden, quietly observing, for almost 2 full days. During this time, they identified certain targets. They planted mines and documented the entire scene. They even managed to snap multiple photographs of the base and, in an audacious move, captured a Third Reich hostage. It was almost too good to be true. Everything had gone perfectly up till this point. But then, just as things seemed to be under control, their luck ran out. With everything set, the unit began making their way back through the tunnel to leave that cavern. But just as they were doing so, their cover was blown. A small group of Third Reich soldiers had spotted them, and to make matters even worse, several of those terrifying polar men, well, they joined in the chase also. Thinking fast, the team decided to leave some of the mines at the tunnel entrance. The plan now, well, it was to detonate once they were far enough away, hoping to collapse part of the entrance and slow down their pursuers. It was a solid idea, not perfect. By the time the mines went off, some of the Third Reich soldiers and polar men had already made it past the blast zone and were still coming after them. What followed was nothing short of chaos. By the time the surviving members of the unit reached the other end of the tunnel, only 3 of them were still alive. The scientist, the Norwegian guy, and James Roberts' source. The rest of the team had been lost in the brutal battle that broke out during their escape. Once they regrouped with the 2 soldiers that were guarding the dry valley entrance, they planted the last of the explosives they had on them at the tunnel opening. When those mines detonated, the entire entrance was obliterated. In fact, when the dust had all settled, there was no evidence of any tunnel ever existing. The survivors were quickly retrieved and then transported off to the Falkland Islands, where they received strict orders. Not a single word about this mission to anyone. The cover-up had officially begun, and as far as the world was concerned, this operation never happened. Now here's where things take a bit of a strange turn. Not only were the surviving members of the unit ordered never to speak about this mission, but they were also given an official explanation for what they had encountered in that tunnel. Sounds alright? Good deal. According to their superiors, the tunnel, which the scientist had clearly determined was naturally formed, was just the result of glacial erosion. And the polar men, well, they were dismissed as nothing more than unkempt soldiers that had gone crazy. Oh, and, of course, the main point, the report made no mention whatsoever that these supposed soldiers were even German. But that's not all. In a bizarre twist, the details of the mission were never to be made public, ever. Yet for reasons that remain unclear, certain parts of the mission were to be selectively leaked to both the United States and the Soviet Union. What those details were and why this decision was made, well, that is still a mystery to this day. Here's another intriguing detail though. According to the source, the Royal Air Force continued flying over Antarctica for years after this mission. These flights focused specifically on areas like Modheim and New Schwabenland. I mean, officially, the reason given was to scout for potential locations for future scientific bases. But let's be honest, given everything that we've just heard, it's hard not to wonder if those flights were actually keeping an eye out for signs of activity around that base. Were they simply checking to make sure that the mission to destroy the Third Reich base had truly been successful? Honestly, it's entirely possible. Now, before we continue, here's a question that's worth considering, right? If there's even a shred of truth to the idea that the Third Reich had a significant presence in Antarctica at the end of World War II, how exactly did the British government find this out? I mean, who tipped them off? One theory about this suggests that the source could have been none other than Karl Donitz. He was Hitler's chosen successor and the man in charge of the German Navy, including the U-boat programme. In the final months of the war, Hitler became almost obsessed with U-boats, pouring resources into them, perhaps hoping that they could turn the tide of the war. But could there have been another motive? There's tons of speculation that the Third Reich began to realise defeat was inevitable, so they started using these U-boats for something else entirely: relocating key personnel. While South America is often mentioned as a destination for fleeing Nazis, could some of these U-boats have been heading to a pre-established base in Antarctica? And if so, was Donitz the man overseeing this U-boat programme? Was he the one who provided this information to the British authorities under interrogation? It's worth noting that after the war, Karl Donitz was tried as a war criminal. Many high-ranking members of the Third Reich were executed, but Donitz, well, he claimed he was ignorant of Nazi atrocities, stating that he only fought what he called a legal war. He also insisted that he had no knowledge of the horrors of the concentration camps. Whether it was due to these claims or a possible behind-the-scenes deal made after his capture, Karl Donitz received a prison sentence of only 10 years, significantly lighter than many others. And let's not forget just how trusted Donitz was by Hitler himself. He wasn't just a high-ranking officer. Hitler believed in him so much that he named him his successor, making him the last leader of the Third Reich. So could Donitz have been the key figure who spilled the secrets about a potential Nazi presence in Antarctica? It's a question, honestly, that leaves a lot to think about. One of the reasons that the British had such free and unchallenged access to Antarctica in the months following the end of World War II in Europe, it boils down to a few key factors. First, the United States was still deeply entrenched in the conflict with Japan, which wouldn't come to an end until the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And secondly, the post-war period was marked by the beginning of a Cold War, a growing rivalry between the two emerging superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. By this point, both of them were racing to secure as much of the Third Reich's engineering expertise and technology as humanly possible, using German scientists and engineers to fuel their military and technological ambitions. Then, by 1946, the United States launched Operation Highjump, an expedition to Antarctica officially intended to establish a research base there. This massive operation kicked off in August of that year, and interestingly, just as it began, British surveillance flights over the region came to an abrupt end. For the duration of Operation Highjump, the Americans essentially had free rein in Antarctica. But here's where it gets weird again. Once Operation Highjump had ended, well, wouldn't you know it, British flights resumed almost immediately. So, What's really going on here? Could it be that the claims made by Admiral Richard Byrd, whether he truly believed them or not, were just part of some larger disinformation campaign? See, Byrd's talk of fast-moving disc-like aircraft capable of reaching from pole to pole in record time, it might sound absurd to most people, but maybe that was the whole point. Could these outrageous claims have been designed to distract people from whatever was really going on in the region? Officially, Operation Highjump ended early due to harsh winter conditions. The mission suffered several fatalities, at least 3 of which were weather related. So the official explanation, it does make sense on the surface. But according to some, the operation may have ended for an entirely different reason. What if Admiral Byrd's claims about advanced aircraft were not baseless, and the military units involved actually stumbled upon remnants of a highly advanced presence? Some even believe that presence might not have been human at all, but extraterrestrial. Some theories suggest that the Third Reich not only established a presence in Antarctica, but also made contact with an ancient extraterrestrial intelligence there, one they allegedly remained in contact with even after the war. This of course ties in with the claims made by Admiral Richard Byrd. Now, I know what you're thinking, right? This sounds so far-fetched, even ridiculous. But here's the thing, many high-ranking members of the Third Reich had a deep interest in the occult. I mean, that was no secret, including the belief in intelligent life on other planets and even alien visitation in humanity's distant past. And while simply believing in these things, well, obviously that doesn't make it true, that kind of belief can lead to serious funding and research. It only takes one determined group of individuals to dedicate their time and resources to uncover something unexpected. Let's be clear here, this is all speculative, right? However, there's no denying that UFO sightings during the Second World War were frequent and widely reported, with many accounts suggesting that these unidentified flying objects were merely observing, rather than taking any sides in the war. But here's where this point gets interesting. Some researchers have questioned how the Third Reich scientists and engineers managed to make such rapid technological advancements in such a short period of time. Could they have received some sort of outside assistance? So here's the big question we're at now. Was the Third Reich's interest in Antarctica tied to their knowledge of possible extraterrestrial presences there? Or, even more intriguingly, could it have been that this extraterrestrial presence, if it existed, directed them there in the first place? These possibilities, as speculative as they may be, well, it only deepens the mystery surrounding the Third Reich's activities in Antarctica, and it keeps us asking, what if? Now, whether or not there really was a top secret British operation in Antarctica that remains buried in classified files, well, that's still up for debate. But if there is any truth to these claims, we have to ask, could this help explain the strategic importance of the Falkland Islands to the British government? With its close proximity to Antarctica, could the Falklands have served as a convenient launch point for future military activity on the frozen continent? And, more importantly than that, is there still something of significance hidden there today? Those are big questions, and maybe they're best saved for another discussion, but they're certainly worth thinking about. Before we go, here's another quick detail. In 1984, the British Antarctic Survey discovered a hole in the ozone layer, officially announcing it the following year in 1985. What's fascinating about this is that the hole appeared directly over Queen Maud Land, also known as New Schwabenland. Now, scientists attributed the ozone hole to the increased use of CFCs, but some researchers who have actually delved into this alleged secret activities in Antarctica, well, things like hidden bases or advanced weapons testing, they have a different theory. They suggest that this hole might have been caused by something far more dramatic than just using deodorant in Antarctica, like a powerful explosion, possibly even nuclear. It's a chilling idea when you think about it, but probably not surprising. And here's one last intriguing twist to this story. According to certain reports, in 1999, an expedition team supposedly discovered a brand new virus in Antarctica. A virus not known to science, and one that no animal or human had immunity to. Now, we should take all this with a pinch of salt. as there hasn't been any major news coverage to back this up. But just think about it for a second. If the Third Reich truly had a presence in Antarctica like that, and given their track record of experimentation and scientific ambition, is it that far-fetched to imagine that a virus was being developed, or perhaps accidentally released, from an alleged base in Antarctica? Could the destruction of such a base have unintentionally released this virus? One thing is for sure. Antarctica holds its secrets tightly. Its mysteries and conspiracies will keep us guessing for years to come. Whether we'll ever uncover the full truth, well, that still remains to be seen. But for now, the icy continent keeps us wondering. That's it for another video, folks. Thanks ever so much for taking the time to listen to me ramble on. Stay safe out there, please. Tell someone that you love them. And remember, as always, keep smiling.